Progressive Stages of Meditation on Emptiness, by Venkenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche, translated and arranged by Shenpan Hukam. Preface. The Venerable Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche came to Europe at the request of H. Karmapa XVI in 1977. He is one of the most erudite scholars and accomplished yogis of the Karma Kagyu lineage. He is especially well known for his breadth of vision and the clarity of his Dharma expositions. He first taught the progressive stages on emptiness in Europe in 1978, and over the years he taught it again on a number of occasions in different countries, including America in 1985. In 1979 he asked me to write a small booklet by transcribing his teachings given that year to the Kagayapa Institute of Mahayana Buddhist Studies, Kagyotechen Shedra, in Brussels. Due to circumstances which forced me to produce the booklet very hurriedly, it was inadequate in many ways. Nonetheless, it was well received and immediately translated into French and Greek. The French translator, Jérôme Adou, had the opportunity to expand several points in the book during consultations with Khenpo Rinpoche, and these have been included in this second edition of the English version. Over the several years that have elapsed since the appearance of the first edition, Khenpo Rinpoche has further clarified a number of questions for me and has asked me to include the clarifications in this edition. With Khenpo Rinpoche's permission, I have also included a number of points that arose in the discussions my husband Michael Hukam and I had with Khenpo Rinpoche in Brussels and Oxford in 1984 and 1985. The present text represents, therefore, a more refined and extensive version of the original transcribed course. In order to incorporate the new material at appropriate moments in the text without disturbing the flow, the whole text has been rewritten and rearranged. I hope in this way to have succeeded in presenting all Rinpoche's points clearly and accurately in a readable form. In addition, discussion of views commonly held by Westerners has also been included. I found that a number of intelligent and perceptive proofreaders had difficulty in relating to the subject matter, because of certain assumptions they were making as Westerners, concerning what Khenpo Tsultrim was saying. Since I find these questions often arise, I have tried to circumvent misunderstanding by actually formulating them in ways I have heard expressed and then showing how they relate to the subject matter in hand. In general, where the views of Westerners are referred to, these sections represent my own additions. It should be noted that much of Khenpo Tsultrim's presentation is derived from Kongtrul's Encyclopedia of Knowledge, Shizbya Kongkyub. Kongtrul was a great Kagyu teacher of the late 19th century, famous for his non-sectarian approach. Signed, Shenpan Hukam, Oxford, May 1986. The translator. Shenpan Hukam had already studied and practiced under the direction of Kagyu Lamas for 10 years before meeting Venkenpo Gyamtso Rinpoche in 1977. She has studied under him for 11 years and is a member of the Kagyotechen Shedra, established by him in 1978. In 1986 she completed her doctoral thesis at Oxford University on Tathagata Garbha doctrine according to the Shentong interpretation of the Ratnagotravibhaga, which is to be published as a book shortly. Introduction. The Tibetan term Stong Nyadzgamrim means something like progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. The idea of a series of meditation practices on a particular aspect of the Buddha's teachings is that by beginning with one's first rather coarse common sense understanding, one progresses through increasingly subtle and more refined stages until one arrives at complete and perfect understanding. Each stage in the process prepares the mind for the next insofar as each step is fully integrated into one's understanding through the meditation process. 3 stages in the process of understanding. Meditation should be understood as the third stage in the development of one's understanding. The first stage is to listen to or study the teachings with an open and receptive mind that does not distort what is being heard or studied. The second stage is carefully to reflect on what has been received in order to clarify its true significance. The third stage is to integrate the newly acquired knowledge or understanding into one's being or character. In a sense, this is like putting it into practice. When one talks about meditation practice, one does not mean one is practicing meditation so that one day one will have perfected it and be able to give a perfect performance. Rather, it is practice in the sense of actually doing or being it as opposed to just thinking about it. 3 fields of investigation. The whole of Buddhism is structured around this threefold training in listening, reflecting and meditating. While Buddhist scholars concentrate on studying or listening to the Buddha's doctrine, the logicians study valid means of knowing and reasoning, the tools with which one reflects and is able to discern what is true and false. This corresponds to the stage of reflection. The yogis or meditators are those who have established through listening and reflection what must be the case and who are now engaged in training themselves in the art of abandoning their delusions. It is one thing to decide through reasoning what must be true and another actually to see the world in that way. By relying on these 3 practices and using each to enhance the others, the fog of confusion and clouds of ignorance are removed. Knowledge and understanding can then shine forth unimpeded like the sun breaking through the mist at dawn. 3 ways to remove doubt. At the listening stage, a person should study the Buddha's word in the sutras and commentaries, relying on explanations of qualified teachers who can clarify one's doubts. At the reflecting stage, one discovers further areas that lack clarity and a teacher's guidance will again be required. After further reflection, yet more doubts may arise, so the process has to be repeated until a certitude concerning the meaning and significance of the teaching has arisen. With this certitude, or confidence, one is able to embark on meditation. Through meditation, doubts and hesitations should disappear, so if one finds them increasing, one should resort once more to listening and reflecting. As the doubts disappear, one experiences directly the true meaning of the teaching, so that eventually one's meditation stabilizes free from hesitation or uncertainty. Although people vary as to how much time they have to spend at each stage, everyone needs each stage of the process if they are to reach liberation. Meditation without listening and reflecting is blind, but listening and reflecting without meditation is like having eyesight and no legs. 3 texts to follow. There are Buddhist texts that correspond to each stage of this process. For example, the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, Dwagspo Dharrachyan, by Gampopa lays out the paths and stages of the Bodhisattva according to the Mahayana Sutras. This corresponds to the listening stage, where one learns about the vast and profuse aspects of the relative truth, for example karma, impermanence, love, and compassion. One can practice progressive stages of meditation, Sgamrim, on this text by reflecting systematically on its main points. Thus, by studying this text, one can reflect and meditate on relative truth. The Madhyamakavattara, D. Buletin Malajugpa, by Kondrakirti gives a logical exposition of the absolute truth of emptiness. After studying this text, one can reflect and meditate on absolute truth. This book of the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness is intended to assist the development of the meditator's understanding of this. The Mahayana Aratantrasastra, also known as the Ratnagatravibhaga, Arjayad Blat Rna in Tibetan, is attributed in the Tibetan tradition to Maitreya. It introduces the meditator to the doctrine of Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature, which concerns the clear light nature of mind. It emphasizes that for the ultimate realization of Buddhahood to arise, one has to experience one's true nature directly without any conceptual effort to clear away delusion or to create an enlightened state. It teaches that as long as one does not experience the full extent of the powers of the enlightened mind, one has not reached complete liberation. This is a more subtle teaching than merely that of showing all dharmas are empty of self-nature. It should be studied and practiced after the progressive meditation on emptiness that is outlined in this book. The doctrine of Tathagata Garbha outlined in the Mahayana Aratantrasastra lays the basis for understanding Vajrayana and Mahamudra teachings and practice. These teachings take for granted that the practitioner has already understood the vast aspects of the relative truth, and the empty nature of all dharmas, so that he is ready to relax in the clear light nature of mind just as it is, here and now, using all experience to enhance the clarity of his understanding. The importance of the relative truth, Samvritasatya, Kunradza Bdenpa. From these explanations it will be clear that as a preliminary to following the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness, one should listen to, reflect on, and meditate on the jewel ornament of liberation or some similar text. Without a proper understanding of the vast aspects of the relative truth, meditation on emptiness can be misleading and even dangerous. Although insight may come quickly, stability comes slowly. The relative truth gives us a way of looking at life and the world which, while conforming to our ordinary common sense notions of time and space, is conducive to enlightenment, i.e. liberation, which lies beyond them. The relative truth is the foundation of all the Buddha's teaching because it gives a proper understanding of what is to be abandoned and what is to be cultivated. By abandoning unwholesome and cultivating wholesome action, one creates the necessary conditions for listening, reflecting and meditating to be fruitful. In this way it is through respecting the relative truth that the absolute truth can be realized. Absolute truth, Paramarthasatya, Dan Dam Bdenpa. In Buddhism, absolute truth or absolute reality means the end point of one's analysis, in other words, the most basic or fundamental element of existence or experience. For example, if one takes a clay pot, a potter might say that in absolute terms it was clay, but a scientist might say it was a collection of atoms. If he were being more precise, he might say the atoms themselves consisted of atomic particles moving in space, but even this would be a rough approximation to reality. In absolute terms, atomic particles can no longer be defined precisely these days. They cannot be said to be this or that or here or there, they have to be expressed in terms of probability. No doubt scientists will express it differently again in a few years' time. In the same way, absolute truth presents itself differently to practitioners at the various levels of their practice. Just as this emerges in the experience of an individual practitioner, it occurs historically in the way that the Buddhist scriptures emerged as a progression of increasingly subtle teachings. Progressive Stages of Meditation on Emptiness. This book, Progressive Stages of Meditation on Emptiness, presents the key stages in the Buddhist experience of the absolute truth of emptiness as fivefold. 1. The Sravaka stage, 2. The Siddhamatra stage, 3. The Svatantrika Madhyamaka stage, 4. The Prasangika Madhyamaka stage, 5. The Shentong Madhyamaka stage. Although these stages are named after the Buddhist schools that formulated them, in fact, they represent the stages in the development of an individual's understanding of emptiness. We are not interested at this point in getting involved in scholastic and philosophical debate about exactly how each school worked out its system in detail. The point is that these stages represent four readily recognizable stages in the progression from a gross cognizance to increasingly subtle levels of understanding. In general, a practitioner should be given a teaching that corresponds with his capacities and level of understanding. However, except for the occasional well-endowed practitioner, most people cannot understand and practice the most subtle and profound teachings on emptiness as soon as they hear them. Instead, they have to progress through a series of levels starting with the most basic teaching, just as one has to start in class 1 at school and gradually work one's way up from there. For example, in the case of a very technical subject, one does not expect to understand the subtleties discussed by experts without having learned the first principles. In the same way, it is highly unlikely that a person will gain an accurate understanding of the most profound teachings of the Buddha without having gone through the progressive stages of the teaching leading up to them. One can think of the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness as the stages in the refinement process of a piece of gold ore. The initial stages of the process are somewhat gross but nonetheless effective. The later stages become more and more refined until finally the completely pure refined gold itself emerges. Here the gold is compared to the absolute truth of the emptiness itself. Another example of how the stages of the meditation represent a progression from gross to subtle is that of a person being instructed on how to find a needle on a mountain. First, he needs to know the general direction of the mountain, for which he needs a large-scale map. Once he has found the mountain, he needs a small-scale map in order to find the exact location. It may lie near a large rock, for example. On nearing the rock, he can be shown the exact tree under which it lies. On arriving under the tree he needs the exact place pointed out. Finally, however, it is with his own eyes that he has to find it. In the same way, the early stages of the meditation progression bring one nearer and nearer to the true realization of emptiness, but finally it is through one's own direct perception that it is seen.